In our headlines on this Monday, February 24th, here in South Korea. Ukraine marks a grim milestone today. That is 3 years of Russian aggression, with Vladimir Putin attempting to justify the assault by asserting that it is necessary to protect Russian-speaking civilians in eastern Ukraine and to prevent Kyiv from entering NATO. Meanwhile, U.S. Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick calls for an investment of at least $1 billion from Korean companies in the U.S. and for tangible results within Trump's term to qualify for business support. And the final hearing of the impeachment trial against President Yoon Suk-yeol takes place tomorrow amid much anticipation in the details of his concluding remarks in defense of his short-lived martial law. The Trump administration is demanding payback from Ukraine for Washington's support of Kyiv's defense against Moscow's invasion. Our Park Go-news starts us off.
U.S. President Donald Trump has sought a deal that would not only have Ukraine repay the U.S. for its financial support for the years, but more on top. The deal calls for the U.S. to take 50% of Ukraine's mineral and natural resources revenues worth $500 billion. But the deal would include not only revenue from rare earth, but also uranium, lithium, oil, gas, and even some port revenues. The deal also specifies that U.S. companies must hold 50% ownership of Ukraine's rare earth elements deposits. This would allow the U.S. to receive more than 3 times what was given to Kyiv for its military and humanitarian support in the past 3 years. While Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky initially rejected the deal, calling for security guarantees, U.S. Special Envoy to the Middle East Steve Witkoff said on Sunday the agreement is expected to be signed sometime this week. However, one expert said the situation is more complex.
It's going to be very difficult because Zelensky doesn't have the constitutional right, even as the president in a time of martial law and war, to sign away his country's resources. This is something that will have to be scrutinized by the Ukrainian parliament and the various expert committees.
He added Ukraine has the power to slow down the process, while saying U.S. mining companies are less competitive than companies from countries like China and Australia. Meanwhile, President Zelensky has offered to resign from office in exchange for a peace guarantee and Ukraine's membership in NATO.
If it's about peace in Ukraine and you really want me to leave my position, I am ready to do that. I can exchange it for NATO membership if there is such an opportunity.
However, earlier this month, U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said Kyiv joining NATO was unrealistic, shooting down any prospects of Ukraine's membership. Washington and Moscow will also be holding talks on improving bilateral relations in the coming days. The Kremlin said that the meeting will involve the Russian Foreign Ministry and the U.S. State Department. Park Go-news, Arirang News.
And against that backdrop, Ukraine today, that is February 24th, marks a grim milestone of unprovoked Russian assault that has lasted for 3 years. And the latest efforts to restore security and stability are doing little to offer a peace of mind. Our Kim Bo-kyung files this report.
11% of its land has been lost, and the population has decreased by nearly 10 million in Ukraine since Russia began its full-scale invasion in February 2022. Russia has captured most of the 4 southeastern regions: Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson. Considering land already lost to Russia, Crimea, and Russian-backed separatists since the conflict began in 2014, the total land Ukraine has lost is about 18%. Ukraine launched a surprise offensive last August, capturing Russia's Kursk region, only for it to be recaptured by Russian forces. Now, with Donald Trump back in the Oval Office, the war has entered a new phase, with the U.S. and Russia beginning the first step of a series of engagements to bring the war to an end. Excluded from the talks, Europe and Ukraine are scrambling for security measures to deter Russia. One expert says having Europe's own security force will be a must, though it might take some time.
Europe will have to have peacekeeping troops or some type of security forces, however they call it, but it will likely be difficult to form a large number of troops in a very short period of time.
Ukraine itself is working to have a U.S. presence in the territory, with Kyiv to reportedly soon sign a mineral agreement. The expert says the focal point would be what security measures the U.S. has promised Ukraine in return.
If Ukraine has made such significant concessions, accepting the mineral deal, it's likely that the U.S. made proposals of taking on a role in providing further security guarantees.
Even if the U.S. allows Ukraine to be a NATO member in exchange for mineral development rights for rare earth elements, whether Russia would tolerate this remains a question, though its original purpose was to just gain Ukraine's territory. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News.
And North Korea is supplying half of Russia's ammunition on the front lines of the latter's military campaign against Ukraine. Now, this is according to the head of military intelligence in Ukraine's defense ministry, as reported by Reuters. Lieutenant General Kirilo Budanov says North Korea is supplying self-propelled howitzers and multiple rocket launch systems to Russia. Such remarks were shared during a press conference on the eve of the third year of Russian invasion of Ukraine. North Korea, in addition to providing weapons to Russia, deployed thousands of troops last year to support Russian forces. Also, North Korea, for the 15th year in a row, remains on the blacklist of an intergovernmental body founded in 1989 to fight money laundering and terrorist financing. Now, in its latest report last Friday, the Financial Action Task Force also raised concerns over North Korea's role in the funding of nuclear weapons proliferation. Accordingly, the task force is calling for increased vigilance and stronger measures to protect the global financial system. Also included on the blacklist are Iran and Myanmar. The Trump administration has called for an investment of at least $1 billion from Korean companies in return for business support. Our correspondent Lee Soo-jin reports.
Newly appointed Commerce Secretary U.S. Howard Lutnick has told South Korea's business leaders that they should invest at least $1 billion in exchange for incentives from the U.S. government. The remark was made during a meeting with the South Korean business delegation led by SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won in Washington, D.C. on Friday local time. When a member of the delegation presented a multi-million-dollar investment plan, Lutnick said the U.S. seeks at least $1 billion in investment, an amount that would qualify for various forms of support from the U.S. government. This comment aligns with the America First investment policy memorandum that President Donald Trump signed after Lutnick's swearing-in ceremony. The memo states that foreign investments of at least $1 billion may qualify for expedited fast-track regulatory approvals, making it easier for investors from allied nations to complete deals quickly. Lutnick also stressed during the meeting that investments must deliver visible results within Trump's term, such as breaking ground on projects within a year of committing funds, hinting that mere investment pledges without timely actions would be unacceptable. Che, who met with reporters at the two-day Trans-Pacific dialogue that began on Friday, said that while the U.S. wants more production facilities to be built in the U.S., incentives must also be provided to Korean companies. He also added that the delegation achieved what it set out to do and that the U.S. was interested in the 6 sectors that were discussed, which include shipbuilding, energy, nuclear power, AI and semiconductors, and mobility, and materials, parts, and equipment. A White House official who was also present at the meeting echoed this sentiment, saying that while the U.S. has held over 20 economic delegations, the meeting with the South Korean delegation was the most productive. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
In other news, this past weekend, Japan ruffled diplomatic feathers by laying claim to South Korea's Dokdo Island yet again. Our foreign affairs correspondent Bae Eun-ji has details.
For 20 years, the local government in Japan's Shimane prefecture has been holding annual events to claim that Dokdo is Japanese territory. A senior Japanese official in charge of territorial issues, Eriko Imai, attended this year's ceremony on Saturday. The Japanese government has been sending vice ministerial level officials to the annual event since 2013, when Shinzo Abe served as the country's prime minister. Dokdo, located off South Korea's east coast, has long been at the center of diplomatic tension between the two neighboring countries. Japan has claimed sovereignty for decades in its policy papers, public statements, and school textbooks. In response, Seoul's foreign ministry called in Daisuke Mibae, the deputy chief of mission at the Japanese embassy in Seoul, on Saturday to protest. It also urged the Japanese government to immediately abolish the event, stressing that Dokdo is South Korean territory historically, geographically, and under international law. Experts say that it's important for Japan to act responsibly to forge a better bilateral relationship.
If Japan truly desires to achieve a meaningful relationship with South Korea, I believe the first step is to get rid of this absurd event. I would also like to say it's time for the Japanese government and local authorities to face up to its history and act in a way that will not be shameful to future generations.
This year marks the 60th anniversary of the normalization of diplomatic relations between Seoul and Tokyo. But territorial claims over Dokdo continue to remain a major obstacle to improving bilateral ties. 배은지, Arirang News.
And come tomorrow, that is Tuesday, the final hearing at the impeachment trial against President Yoon takes place in the afternoon. Amid much anticipation in the details of the president's upcoming concluding remarks in defense of his short-lived martial law, our correspondent Oh Soo-young has more.
President Yoon will have one last chance to make his case against impeachment this week, as the Constitutional Court wraps up trial hearings on Tuesday. The 11th and final session comes 73 days after the National Assembly passed a vote to remove him from power after his December 3rd martial law order. According to the court, the justices will review the remaining evidence that hasn't been scrutinised yet before giving both the National Assembly and President Yoon's legal teams 2 hours to present their closing arguments. Then the Assembly's impeachment panel chair Chung Chong-le and President Yoon will deliver their final statements with no time restrictions. Chung is expected to wrap up the Assembly's position that Yoon's declaration of martial law was illegal in both procedure and substance, and that his orders on December 3rd violate constitutional principles. Meanwhile, Yoon is expected to reiterate arguments previously presented by his legal team that martial law is an executive right of the president and was issued as a warning against the dominant opposition party's tyranny in parliament that paralysed government functions. Yoon has also raised concerns over national security and election fraud. As speculation grows over whether Yoon will present a political compromise or gesture, including a suggestion to revise the amendment to shorten his presidential term, his legal team said Sunday that it is not the president's style to offer conditional measures in order to avoid impeachment. The team said Yoon is currently preparing his final statement and is carefully considering various options. Once the hearings conclude, the deliberation period begins. Then Presiding Justice Chung Yong-sik will present his review before all 8 justices vote for or against impeachment. The ruling will be drafted based on the majority opinion. The court will then decide the date to announce the verdict, which is expected within 2 weeks of the last hearing, likely in around mid-March. If 6 or more of the 8 justices vote in favour of the impeachment, President Yoon will be removed from office, triggering a snap presidential election within 60 days. However, if at least 3 justices oppose impeachment, the motion will be dismissed and President Yoon will immediately resume his duties. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Over in Germany, Friedrich Merz is poised to become the next chancellor as his centre-right Christian Democratic Union party wins the highest proportion of the ballots cast in Sunday's election. Our Yoon has the latest.
Germany's conservative Christian Democratic Union is expected to win the federal election, positioning its leader, Friedrich Merz, to become the next chancellor of Europe's largest economy.
We must now quickly regain our ability to act so that we can do the right thing at home, so that we can be present in Europe again, so that the world realizes that Germany is being governed reliably again. That's what the Conservatives stand for. That's what we stand for, and that's what I personally stand for.
On Sunday, initial exit polls showed that Merz's CDU and the allied Christian Social Union secured just under 30% of the votes, leaving the center-left Social Democratic Party of current Chancellor Olaf Scholz far behind with approximately 16%. In second place was the far-right Alternative for Germany, securing around 20%, roughly doubling its result from the 2021 election. The AfD's surge, fueled by growing public concerns over immigration and security, was accompanied by a vow from the party leader to claim first place in future elections. However, despite the party's strong showing, the AfD will not be part of the new government, as all other parties have committed to excluding them from power. With Merz's victory nearly certain, he now faces the task of forming a coalition government, which he has vowed to complete by Easter, April 20th. To secure a majority in parliament, Merz will likely need to form alliances with one or more parties, potentially including the SPD, which experienced a dramatic drop from its 2021 result of over 25%, marking its worst performance. Despite the open support for the far-right Alternative for Germany party from figures like Elon Musk and US Vice President J.D. Vance during the election, President Donald Trump welcomed Merz's victory, calling it a great day for both Germany and the US. Merz, who has never held a ministerial position, has promised to take a strong leadership role in Europe and increase support for Ukraine. In a roundtable TV discussion on Sunday night, Merz remarked that it had become clear in recent days that the Trump administration was largely indifferent to the fate of Europe. He emphasized that his priority would be to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible to achieve real independence from the US, step by step. Yoon, Arirang News.
And in sports news, Tottenham Hotspur captain Son Heung-min has become the 11th English Premier League player with at least 70 goals and 70 assists. The Spurs played Ipswich Town away on Sunday, and Son contributed with 2 assists in the 4-1 win. Now, this latest performance gives him an EPL total of 126 goals and 71 assists, just behind current Premier League stars Mohamed Salah and Kevin De Bruyne. It's also the 5th season that Son has scored and assisted at least 10 goals. Up next, we share with you some promising advances in the use of surgical robots and interventional treatment of cardiovascular disease. Our Cha Yun-kyung explains.
Researchers have been using a surgical robot, nicknamed the catheter robot, to perform venous and arterial catheterization for the removal of blood clots. A guide wire is moved through blood vessels, controlled by the robot and overseen by a certified surgeon who can take control using a joystick to locate and treat blockages in, for example, the carotid arteries. The success rate of treatment using the catheter robot has been 100% in clinical trials due to its precise control and accuracy, and it also reduces operation times by assisting the surgeon effectively. It also lowers the patient's exposure to radiation by cutting the time needed for real-time X-ray imaging. The robot is currently undergoing further clinical trials before commercialization after acquiring the new excellent technology certification from the Ministry of Health and Welfare for the first time in Korea's surgical robot industry.
We will start using catheter robots in 5 designated hospitals from July this year. We can lower the operation time by controlling the robot precisely, 1 millimeter at a time.
Surgical robots are being welcomed by patients as they raise the accuracy of surgery and lower the error range. Eyes are on whether catheter robots can be successfully commercialized. Cha Yun-kyung, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you the latest stories from around the globe. In the Middle East, Israel has postponed the release of over 600 Palestinian prisoners, citing concerns over the humiliating nature of recent hostage return ceremonies conducted by Hamas. On Sunday local time, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced the indefinite delay of the release of 620 Palestinian prisoners. This is in response to what Israel describes as cynical and demeaning ceremonies orchestrated by Hamas during the handover of Israeli hostages. During the recent release of 6 Israeli captives, Hamas paraded the individuals before crowds in highly publicized events, a move Israel claims breaches the terms of the ceasefire agreement. Netanyahu has demanded assurances from Hamas to cease such practices before any further prisoner releases occur. In response, Hamas has accused Israel of not fulfilling its obligations under the ceasefire deal. The postponement raises concerns about the fragility of the ceasefire agreement. In Rome, Pope Francis remains in critical condition at the Gemelli Hospital due to a severe respiratory infection and early signs of kidney failure, according to the Vatican. Despite his health challenges, the Pope, aged 88, remains alert and has expressed gratitude for the global prayers supporting him. Also in a pre-recorded message, he marked the 3rd anniversary of the Ukraine conflict, describing it as a painful and shameful milestone for humanity. Meanwhile, dozens of people gathered beneath Pope Francis' hospital window, as well as at the Vatican, to pray for his recovery. Finally, in the United Kingdom, Peggy, a 5-year-old pug and Chinese crested mix, has won the Best Canine Newcomer Award at the FITUS Awards, an Academy Award for dogs in London. Peggy had been crowned Britain's ugliest dog in 2023 for her unique appearance, characterized by her sparse white hair and tongue sticking out. Those looks caught the attention of filmmakers, leading her to the role of Dogpool in the blockbuster Deadpool and Wolverine. On set, Peggy charmed co-stars Ryan Reynolds and Hugh Jackman, mastering tricks like jumping into Reynolds' arms. Her journey from rescue dog to successful silver screen star has inspired many to consider adopting rescue dogs. Choi Ji-hee, Arirang News.
It's the last Monday of February. The morning started at around -6 degrees Celsius in Seoul, but the cold spell has weakened a bit during the day, with Seoul rising up to 5 degrees, about 5 degrees higher than the same time yesterday. The temperature will move up to 7 degrees tomorrow, rising up to the normal level for this time of year. The dryness of the atmosphere is intensifying as cold and dry winds blow. Currently, dry weather warnings and advisories are issued all over the country. As strong winds of around 50 meters per second will blow, please be careful with wildfires. Tomorrow, Daejeon and Daegu will start off at -4 degrees, Chuncheon at -7 degrees. Daytime temperatures will rise up to around 10 degrees in most parts of the country. Daejeon and Gwangju will move up to 9 degrees. It will hit 10 degrees in Busan and Jeju. The days will get warmer and warmer as we head into the second half of the week. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Coming up right after this break is our daily panel session, and today we touch upon diplomacy. Do stay with us.
How to survive in Korea. One room, So, you're surviving in Korea? If you've signed a contract for a one-room, obviously you're a pro. But the real deal begins now. Step 1. Housewarming. No need to buy toilet paper, diffusers or hand soap. You'll get them soon enough as housewarming gifts. And some are bound to pile up. There's nothing better to serve your guests than milpaeyu nabe. If you have Korean friends coming over, don't forget the extra garlic. Step 2. Garbage disposal. With great power comes great responsibility. You've had a good time, so let's get to work. It might be tempting to sweep everything into a trash can, but you have to separate your garbage. Not bothered? Beware that negligence is punished with a fine or public humiliation. Step 3. Drying rack. You're excited to live alone in Korea, but the fate of these items, hanger, storage, or a hanger. Go get fresh coffee outside. Jogging doesn't cost anything, and nothing beats instant rice. But keep one item around so that you don't get too lonely. Step 4. Pros of living alone. No mum. Cons of living alone. No mum. A new towel doesn't magically appear. You have to do the laundry regularly. If anyone gives a towel as a souvenir, take it. Get rid of mold immediately. Don't be lazy with the vacuum cleaner. Housework is an endless affair. Overwhelmed? Give your mum a call and thank her for everything she's done. Did you survive in your one room? Wait, you have an unwanted visitor. Call someone you fancy. Could be the right person for the job.
The Trump administration's foreign policy, according to one U.S. daily, is unsettling its allies here in this part of the world, including South Korea. With more in Monday's edition of Press Perspective. Hello and welcome to this week's first edition of Press Perspective. It's Monday, February 24th here in Seoul. I'm Min San-hee. Today, the world marks 3 years since Russia launched an all-out invasion of Ukraine, and the latest U.S. efforts to end the Kremlin's aggression against Kyiv are raising quite a bit of concern here in this part of the world about a dramatic shift in Washington's overall foreign policy. For more on this, I have Celio Ferretti with French daily Le Croix here in the studio. Celio, it's great to have you back.
Glad to be here.
I also have Chan Soram with American broadcaster Radio Free Asia. Soram, welcome back.
Glad to be here too.
Right, Celia, we'll start with you. So Trump has spoken of a meeting with Putin in Saudi Arabia for his first overseas summit since re-entering the White House. What message does this move send to America's allies in Europe, do you think?
Indeed, President Donald Trump said in a social media post that he had a lengthy and highly productive phone call with President Vladimir Putin, during which they discussed their mutual desire to end Russia's war with Ukraine and plans to potentially meet. Speaking to Russian state media, Sergei Ryabakov, Russia deputy foreign minister, said a possible Putin-Trump summit could involve broad talks on global issue, not just the war in Ukraine. The question is about starting to move toward normalizing relations between the two countries, finding a way to resolve the most acute and potentially very, very dangerous situation as the war, but also maybe trade will be on the table. We'll see about that. Ryabakov added that the US and Russian envoy could meet within the next 2 weeks to pave the way for the summit. So now it's just a diplomacy level staff. Russian and US representative meeting in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday agreed to start working toward ending the war in Ukraine and improving the relation between the two countries. An extraordinary change, a shift in the US policy, which is happening under Trump. Senior US officials have suggested Ukraine will have to give up its goal to join NATO and also give up on the 20% of the territory they lost during the war. Overall, if peace is great, the condition of the peace and the organization of the summit don't send a good signal for Ukraine and Europe. Trump has been siding on Russia's side for the most part. He even attacked Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, accusing him of starting the war. He withdrew the comment a few days after, but he still mentioned that Zelensky should have avoided the war. What is to fear is that Europe and Ukraine will be sidelined in this summit. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer said he will visit Washington in the next week to focus on negotiation with Ukraine. He stressed that no decision about Ukraine can be made if Europe is not at the table. The EU is also behind this proposition. Ukraine seems also to rally about that, although maybe Zelensky will meet either Putin or Trump in the coming month, but that's really uncertain for now. And the other European countries, France, Spain, Poland, the Baltic states, are trying to coordinate their diplomatic effort to be at least at the negotiating table.
Right. And ahead of the British Prime Minister's meeting with Mr. Trump, I believe French President Emmanuel Macron will be meeting with Mr. Trump later today in the US, that is. What can we expect from those talks?
Yeah, indeed, French President Emmanuel Macron said he tends to tell US counterpart Donald Trump that it's in the joint interests of America and Europeans to not be weak in the face of Russian leader Vladimir Putin amid this negotiation to end the war. The two will meet indeed today in Washington. Trump's recent statement that echoes Putin's narrative to have a direct negotiation with Moscow have left European allies and Ukraine quite worried about the turn of the discussion that could just skip any caution that the European would have to ensure a long-lasting peace treaty. Trump's strategy recreates uncertainty among the allies because France, but Europe and the US are allies under NATO. So even this alliance could be jeopardized, let's say, by this peace talk actually happening. Since the beginning of his term, in 2017, Emmanuel Macron always pushed for more stronger and independent autonomy of the European Union in terms of strategic defense. He push back this idea of a European defense force that was already in the making in the 50s but got cancelled. But now maybe it could be happening if the US tends to show they're not a reliable ally anymore and siding with not exactly the enemy, but the rival of Europe on the continent. Macron said he will seek to persuade Trump that the US interests in Europe are converging on Ukraine and they should not only side with Russia. That means any peace deal must be negotiated with Ukraine, with Europe, with France, with Germany, with the UK. This is quite a high-risk strategy to really face Trump on this. Macron said in this weekend, he laid out his whole strategy and he planned to attack Trump personally and saying, he said in a social media post, you can't be weak in the face of President Putin. That's not you, that's not your trademark, you're better than that. It's a jab, coupled also with factual warning that if you let Ukraine be taken, Russia has a free way to take whatever they want, and maybe the next country could be Poland, Finland. We don't know where Putin will stop. So it will be a kind of a boxing match between the two leaders. We'll see what happens, and the rest of you is really waiting for the end of this meeting to know what's going to come next.
Right, and against these events in Europe, Soram, here in Korea, Trump's handling of peace talks for an end to Russian aggression against Ukraine is raising concerns that future engagement of the US with regard to North Korea may actually sideline South Korea, especially given the political paralysis here in the country. Do you, Soram, share this concern?
Yeah, there's definitely some concerns about Trump. If Trump pushes forward with his own style of peace talks, like what's happening in Ukraine, South Korea might be left out when it comes to North Korea issue. A former U.S. ambassador to South Korea, Kathleen Stephens, noted that, as he mentioned, European allies were shocked to see the U.S. and Russia negotiating without Ukraine. So she believes that South Korea could fear the same situation happening if Trump decides to talk directly with North Korea, effectively bypassing Seoul. Also, Trump hasn't taken concrete steps regarding South Korea, but he has spoken warmly about Kim Jong-un several times, suggesting he still has a friendly stand towards North Korean leader. Experts point out that just like in Trump's first term, he might go straight to Kim Jong-un again, and if that happens, South Korea, despite being directly threatened by the North, could get sidelined, much like Ukraine was. Plus, experts note that we are in the second year of the North Korea so-called two-state policy, where Pyongyang treat North and South Korea as two separate countries and focus on direct talks with the U.S., and that means North Korea has even less reason to engage Seoul at this point. But some say if Washington and Pyongyang start negotiating, there might be unexpected roles for South Korea, especially if economic supports come into play. But with the current political turbulence in Seoul, including President Yoon's impeachment process, it's tough to see how Seoul can actively shape any talks in the near future. So there's a real chance that a direct Trump and Kim negotiation could move forward without much input from South Korea. So just like how Ukraine was left out of a recent US-Russia high-level meeting.
Right. Well, many pundits have pointed out that Mr. Trump prefers a top-down approach to diplomacy. That being said, Silio, then, how can South Korea make itself relevant to U.S. efforts to engage North Korea, do you think?
As we mentioned, there's a growing concern that South Korea might be sidelined on any talks with the North. Trump has already been during his first meeting with Kim Jong-un, quite unexpected. South Korea was quietly alarmed during this time in 2018 when Trump unexpectedly announced the complete suspension of joint U.S.-South Korean exercise during the summit in Singapore. Shortly after being inaugurated for a second term, Trump told in a Fox News interview on January 23rd that he would be willing to reach out to Kim Jong-un, and is saying that they both got along, calling the North Korean dictator a smart guy. Although Trump administration so far has not outlined any specific policy proposal concerning North Korea, there is once again alarm in Seoul that the US president might make another summit and bypassing the South Korean government, or make concession without really referring before to the South Korean government. A deal that would maybe be beneficial for the North, but not really beneficial for South Korea or the local partners. After Trump Fox interviews, Lee Jae-myung, the head of the opposition Democratic Party in South Korea, said bilateral US-North Korean talks without Seoul input could really be damage to South Korea. If US-North Korean dialogue resume, I quote, there's a high possibility that our Republic of Korea will be sidelined again. That's a significant concern. The problem is there actually currently a vacuum of power in Seoul, and there is not really anyone to meet Trump or someone that has a strong impact to really propose any policy, make any deal with Trump, because Trump is all about deal. And if you come with a proposition, come with an offer, someone who has a legitimacy to really represent Korea, it's the only way to really integrate the table of negotiation. And right now, because we don't have a formal president, South Korea really has to move quickly on this, because Trump will not wait. It's already been just a month, and Trump has really moved on a lot of different topics in Ukraine, in Europe, on China, on trade. He will not wait for South Korea to have someone at the table. So if South Korea wants to negotiate and make something that would be beneficial in a possible summit between Trump and Kim, they will have to fix this policy issue right now.
Right, this leadership vacuum in the country. Soram, as you mentioned, there are quite a number of pundits, though, who say that South Korea can remain relevant by taking on economic initiatives that the Trump administration may promise Kim Jong-un in return for the surrender of the regime's nuclear weapons ambitions. Could you tell us a bit more about these suggestions by pundits?
So we all know Trump tends to put personal relationships over traditional alliances, and we are seeing that again with how he's handling the Russia-Ukraine situation. Now, Trump had well-known relationship with Kim Jong-un, but things are different right now. North Korea's nuclear weapons program had advanced, and more importantly, Kim has built a strong alliance with Russia. In fact, last June, North Korea and Russia signed a mutual defense treaty. So compared to the past, Kim doesn't really need security guarantees from the US. So if Trump really wants to bring Kim back to the table, what could he offer? The answer might be economic supports. North Korea's economy is not in a great shape at this point. So what Pyongyang really needs at this point might be economic supports. Direct U.S. support is an option. Trump earlier mentioned North Korea's beachfront condos, and the U.S. could offer North Korea some much-needed sanctions relief. In return, Pyongyang might scale back its nuclear programs. Some also suggest that Trump could use South Korea as a middleman. When it comes to economic support for North Korea, think about past projects like the Gaesong Industrial Complex. South Korea has experience in economic cooperation with the North, so that could be another option. However, here's the challenging part, politics in South Korea. So progressives are more open to the support to North Korea when it comes to economic and North Korea issues, but on the other hand, conservatives could be more hesitant to the support. So given South Korea's current political situation, it might take some time before Seoul can fully engage in any U.S. and North Korea talks. So some experts suggest that letting South Korea to lead economic initiatives for North Korea in return for denuclearization. It is a bold idea, but whether it can overcome political hurdles both in Washington and Seoul remains uncertain.
Right, well, time will tell then. Moving forward, Celia, American magazine The Atlantic compared the foreign policies of the Trump administration and the former Biden administration. And the article claimed that Biden had weakened Moscow, if you will, to the point that it sought support from North Korea, but that the Trump administration was currently throwing away this leverage, and I quote, this leverage, and ultimately handing the world to China. What are your thoughts on this?
It's something I've seen a lot on social media, actually. China would have won the game without even playing it because the US and Trump decided to forfeit. Just about all Trump policies so far, both at home and abroad, are rapidly destroying the foundation itself of the American power in the world. The main beneficiary seems to be China and the Chinese leader Xi Jinping, who has been planning for this moment when Washington stumbles and China can finally take the lead at the first global superpower. For the last century or so, the US rose to become a global superpower with both hard power, military everywhere, safeguarding the seas and trade routes, but also soft power with cultural impacts and also program to support the economy development program in a poor region of the world. And if you look at it, US is kind of everywhere. Any country has a program funded by the US to promote something or to build something. Now Trump is voluntarily giving away this leverage. The supposed master negotiator is signaling his willingness to end this program of funding. He also ended the US aid and the National Endowment for Peace, for Democracy, sorry. And this amount of money, supposedly to make some savings on the US budget, but it is really cutting off important program, and we can see it actually in South Korea. A lot of NGO working on North Korean human rights were dependent on US funding to help the situation in the north, to help the people there. But now it's cut off. So all this NGO, they don't really know what's going to happen to them. Maybe they will have to close and shut down their activity in a few months. And if US back down themselves and kind of isolate themselves from the rest of the world, then who's going to take the place? Who's going to do the job instead of the US? And the only country that could do it now is China. And when Trump said he will withdraw from the World Health Organization, China said they will continue to support it and bring even more funds. And it's logical for them to play that role and to have a better image to the Europe or African country or Asian partners. And maybe now Europe, because the US is such unreliable and uncertain and really shifting away from the liberal democracy that it for a while defended, maybe Europe is not friendly with China, but maybe in some days China will be a lesser evil than US, and that's really a big shift in the current world order, and that's something the US provoked themselves.
Right, and something for us to think about as an international community then. So, with regard to tensions here on the Korean Peninsula, do you suppose Trump's amicable ties with Putin could perhaps work to coax Kim Jong-un back to the negotiating table?
So can Trump's tie with Putin be used to bring Kim Jong-un back to the negotiation table? It's hard to predict, but given Trump's relationship with Putin, some say Russia could act as an intermediary to bring North Korea back to the negotiation table. So Trump maintained close relationship with Putin. Held several summits in the past, and they plan to have another summit in a short range of time to discuss ending the war in Ukraine. So Putin also had supported U.S. and North Korea dialogue back in 2019, saying although North Korea and U.S. dialogue has been suspended, the dialogue efforts should be made to build trust between two countries. However, there is also like strong opposition on this opinion. So Kim said last November that North Korea have used its diplomatic options to create peace with the U.S. and there would be no new summit meetings with any American leaders in the future. And the main reason North Korea refused to engage in dialogue with international community is because of the U.S. sanction and pressure. And now Kim Jong-un has reliable partnership with Russia, so North Korea may be less inclined to talk with the U.S. at this point. So with these reasons, some predict that the relationship between Trump and Putin will not have significant impact on bringing North Korea back to the dialogue table. So while Trump's relationship with Putin could potentially open the diplomatic channel, it is unclear whether it would be enough to bring North Korea back to the negotiation, with Kim Jong-un unwilling to engage such talks without preconditions.
Right. And with regard to Mr. Trump's relationship with Putin, CNN, Celio, had an interesting article about Beijing's concerns regarding the fresh friendship, if you will, between Mr. Trump and Mr. Putin. Could you tell us a bit more about that particular coverage?
Exactly. In Beijing, too, the breakneck of events is seen to be raising question over the U.S., how the U.S. will bring peace and how China can take a role in this negotiation. Xi Jinping, Chinese leader, is carefully looking at how the relationship between Putin and Trump will evolve, and really precarious with Trump's approach. Just weeks ago, China appeared as to play a key role in the peace talks because Trump suggested he could use China's economic power over Russia to maybe negotiate a better peace treaty. But now China seems to be overlooked in the whole process, and China really wanted to be in part of this negotiation, especially about trade, because China wants to avoid a trade war at all costs against Trump. And now that China has also risked a lot during this war because they sided with Russia, continue to make trade with them, saying it's just normal trade, it's not like supporting the war directly, but still in a way it is. And China really sided with Russia at a cost of maybe making Europe, which is a major trading partner of China, angry and maybe wanted to some retaliation measure against China. So Xi Jinping gambled on Russia and maybe to be a neutral middleman between the West and Russia. But now it's sidelined. Maybe they could lose everything they gamble in. What is interesting, though, is that while Trump becomes more of an enemy to Europe, as I mentioned, China has an opportunity to get closer with the old continent and maybe also join EU and UK, as we mentioned earlier, that they should also be at the table, and the peace treaty should not be only between Trump and Putin, but the whole world should be at the table and talking with every possible, because China could also have some economic interest of a peace in Europe for better trade, but also maybe some contract to rebuild Ukraine. So they want to be part of this, and Europe wants also to be part of this. So maybe there's a way for China and Europe to cooperate. At least that could be an option. And also in the long run, as I mentioned, the global world order is shifting, and maybe China would be also an ally after the peace treaty to maybe protect and ensure Russia will not invade the rest of Europe, and maintain a sort of security zone, a border between Poland, Belarus, and Russia. So maybe China would seek to play that role in the future peace treaty.
I suppose time will tell us then. All right, Salim, I'm afraid that's all the time we have, but thank you so much for your time and your thoughts. And Soram, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, well, in light of the grim milestone today with regard to Russian aggression against Ukraine, we end this edition of Press Perspective with prayers to all those enduring violence across the world as we speak.
News for and by MZers, News Generation. Panelists in their 20s and 30s offer fresh insight